"You're going to rot here, old man, and there's nothing you can do about it." Those were the last words my daughter-in-law said before locking the basement door and leaving me to die. After 60 years of building an empire from nothing, I never imagined my only son would conspire to kill me for my fortune. They thought I was just a powerless 82-year-old man, but they were dead wrong. During 3 months imprisoned in that dark basement, they had no idea that every word, every action was being recorded. They didn't know I had already prepared a plan to destroy their lives completely. And when they returned from their European vacation, funded by my stolen money, what they found waiting would make them regret everything forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Thaddeus Whitmore, and at 82 years old, I've learned that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who call you family. For 60 years, I built an empire with these two hands, sacrificing everything to give my son the world. I thought love and loyalty were inherited traits passed down from father to son like the family name. I was wrong, dead wrong. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a masterclass in how greed can turn a grateful child into a monster, and how an old man's wisdom can become the most powerful weapon of all. I started Whitmore Construction in 1965 with nothing but a rusty pickup truck and an unshakable belief that honest work could build something lasting. Dallas, Texas was booming back then, and I was determined to be part of that growth. I worked 20-hour days, slept in my truck between jobs, and ate peanut butter sandwiches for months just to keep every dollar in the business. The early years nearly killed me. Competitors tried to undercut my bids, suppliers demanded cash up front, and banks wouldn't loan money to a nobody from the wrong side of town. But I had something they didn't expect: the stubborn determination of a man who refused to fail. By 1975, we were building shopping centers across North Texas. By 1985, we had government contracts worth millions. By the time I turned 50, Whitmore Construction was the name on half the skyscrapers in downtown Dallas. I had achieved the American dream, and I had done it the right way. Through it all, I had one driving motivation: my son Cornelius. I named him after my grandfather, a railroad worker who taught me that a man's word was his bond and his family was his treasure. I wanted to give Cornelius everything I never had: the best schools, the finest clothes, opportunities that would have seemed impossible to a poor kid like me. Cornelius grew up in our mansion on Turtle Creek Boulevard, surrounded by luxury but never spoiled. At least I thought he wasn't spoiled. I made sure he worked summers at the construction sites, learning the business from the ground up. I taught him to respect the men who swung hammers and poured concrete, because those were the people who built our fortune. When he graduated from Southern Methodist University with a business degree, I was the proudest father in Texas. When he joined Whitmore Construction as a junior executive, I knew my legacy was secure. For 20 years, we worked side by side, building not just buildings, but building what I thought was an unbreakable bond between father and son. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. I should have noticed how his attitude changed after he started running in Dallas high society circles. I should have paid attention when he began questioning my old-fashioned business methods, suggesting that maybe it was time for fresh leadership and modern approaches. But I was blind to the truth because I loved him, because I believed that blood was thicker than greed. The real change began 2 years ago when Cornelius married Evangeline Hartwell. She came from old Dallas money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to earn a dollar. The Hartwells owned banks and oil wells and politicians, and they looked down on self-made men like me as crude newcomers who didn't understand proper society. From the moment I met Evangeline, I could see the calculation in her ice-blue eyes. She didn't see a successful businessman when she looked at me. She saw an aging obstacle standing between her husband and a massive inheritance. She saw dollar signs and estate values and opportunities for acquisition. During their engagement party at the Dallas Country Club, Evangeline cornered me by the bar with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Thaddeus," she said, in that honey-sweet voice that dripped with condescension, "Cornelius tells me you've never done any serious estate planning. A man of your wealth and age really should have his affairs properly organized." I was 79 years old and healthier than men half my age. I was still working 12-hour days and making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But in her mind, I was already a corpse, waiting to be buried. That conversation changed everything. It opened my eyes to a truth I hadn't wanted to see. My son hadn't just married a woman. He had married a predator, and predators are always hunting. Over the next few months, I watched my son transform from the man I had raised into someone I barely recognized. But to understand how devastating this change was, you need to know what Cornelius used to be like. You need to understand the bond we once shared. When Cornelius was 12 years old, he asked me to take him to work on a Saturday. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to see what his father did all day. I remember driving him to a construction site where we were building a 30-story office complex downtown. He wore a little hard hat I had custom made for him and followed me around like a shadow, asking 1,000 questions about steel beams and concrete foundations and architectural blueprints. "Dad," he said, as we watched a crane lift a massive steel beam into place, "when I grow up, I want to build things just like you." That moment is burned into my memory like a photograph. The pride I felt was so overwhelming I had to turn away so he wouldn't see the tears in my eyes. This wasn't just my son talking about following in my footsteps. This was validation that everything I had sacrificed, every 18-hour workday, every missed dinner, every weekend spent reviewing contracts instead of playing catch, had been worth it. For the next 20 years, Cornelius lived up to that promise. He worked summers on our construction sites, learning to operate machinery and understanding what real work felt like. He studied business at SMU, but never forgot the lessons he learned wearing work boots and safety goggles. When he joined the company full-time at 25, he started at the bottom, just like everyone else. I was tougher on him than on any other employee because I knew people would be watching, waiting to say he only got ahead because of his last name. Cornelius never complained. He worked harder than anyone stayed later and earned the respect of our crews through sweat and determination. By the time he was 35, Cornelius was running day-to-day operations while I focused on major contracts and strategic planning. We were the perfect team. He had the energy and modern education I sometimes lacked, while I provided the experience and relationships that had taken decades to build. Our Sunday dinners were sacred. Every week, Cornelius would come to the mansion, and we would talk about business, about life, about his dreams for the future. He wanted to expand into renewable energy projects and sustainable building practices. He had vision and passion and integrity. "Dad," he told me one Sunday when he was 40, "I want to build something that will still be standing 100 years from now. Something that will make you proud long after we're both gone." Those were the words of a son who understood legacy, who valued what we had built together. That man would never have betrayed me. That man would never have plotted to steal everything I had worked for. But that man died the day he met Evangeline Hartwell. The change wasn't immediate. At first it was just small things. Cornelius started wearing more expensive suits and driving luxury cars that cost more than most people's houses. He joined exclusive clubs and began socializing with people who measured success only in dollars and social status. "Dad, you should really update your wardrobe," he said one day, looking at my comfortable work clothes with embarrassment. "We're meeting with some important investors next week, and image matters in business." Image had never mattered before. Results mattered, quality mattered, keeping your word mattered. But suddenly my son was more concerned with appearances than substance. The real transformation accelerated after his engagement to Evangeline. She had opinions about everything: the way I ran board meetings, the outdated office furniture in our headquarters, even the restaurants where I took clients for lunch. "Thaddeus," she would say with that patronizing smile, "successful people in Dallas don't eat at places like that anymore. You need to understand how the modern business world operates." I watched helplessly as my son began adopting her attitudes and values. The man who once took pride in knowing every worker's name started referring to our employees as human resources. The son who used to visit construction sites every week began delegating those responsibilities to subordinates because he was too busy with strategic planning sessions and networking events. Most painful of all our sacred Sunday dinners became irregular, then rare, then non-existent. When I asked about it, Cornelius would say he was too busy with social obligations and relationship building with key stakeholders, but I knew the truth. Evangeline was systematically separating him from me, convincing him that his old-fashioned father was holding him back from achieving his full potential in Dallas high society. The final blow came during a board meeting 6 months before my stroke. Cornelius stood up in front of our entire executive team and suggested that maybe it was time for generational transition in company leadership. "My father has built something incredible," he said, not even looking at me as he spoke, "but the construction industry is evolving rapidly. We need leadership that understands modern markets and contemporary business practices." He was talking about replacing me. In front of people I had hired in the company I had built with my own hands. My son was suggesting I was too old and outdated to continue leading the organization I had created from nothing. That night I sat alone in my study looking at old photographs of Cornelius and me working together, laughing together, building dreams together. I realized that the son I had loved and trusted for 57 years was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to his ambitions. That's when I decided to fight back. Not with anger or confrontation, but with the same strategic thinking that had built Whitmore Construction into an empire. If Cornelius wanted to play games, I would show him how a master plays. My decision to investigate my own son felt like swallowing poison, but sometimes the medicine that saves your life tastes bitter going down. Over the next few weeks, I began paying attention to details I had previously ignored, and what I discovered made my blood run cold. It started with small things that individually seemed innocent, but together painted a disturbing picture. I noticed that Cornelius had begun staying late at the office on nights when I wasn't there, claiming he was working on special projects that required privacy. When I asked about these projects, he would give vague answers about modernization initiatives and strategic partnerships that he wasn't ready to discuss yet. One evening, I decided to return to the office unexpectedly around 9 o'clock, telling myself I had forgotten some important documents. The building was supposed to be empty except for security, but I saw lights on in my personal office on the top floor, the office that only I was supposed to have access to. I took the elevator up quietly and found Cornelius sitting behind my desk, going through filing cabinets that contained my most sensitive financial records. He had somehow obtained copies of my personal keys and was photographing documents with his phone. When he saw me standing in the doorway, his face went white as a sheet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then that charming smile I knew so well spread across his face, the same smile he had used as a child when caught doing something he shouldn't. "Dad, you startled me," he said, quickly closing the filing cabinet. "I was just looking for the Henderson contract files. I thought they might be in here, but the Henderson files were kept in the main office filing system, and we both knew it. More importantly, I had seen him photographing documents that had nothing to do with any current contracts. He had been taking pictures of my personal financial statements, my investment portfolios, and my insurance policies. "Find what you were looking for?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Actually, no. I'll check the main files tomorrow." He stood up quickly, avoiding eye contact. "You know, Dad, you really should consider updating your security systems. Anyone could walk in here after hours." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. The person who had walked in was my own son, using keys he had no authorized reason to possess. That incident opened my eyes to a pattern of behavior I had been too trusting to notice before. I started keeping a journal, documenting every suspicious interaction, every strange conversation, every moment when I felt like I was being manipulated or deceived. The evidence accumulated quickly. I discovered that Cornelius had been meeting regularly with estate planning attorneys without my knowledge. When I called my own lawyer to ask if anyone had been inquiring about my will, he confirmed that Cornelius had contacted him multiple times, asking detailed questions about inheritance laws and the process for declaring someone mentally incompetent. He said he was concerned about your cognitive health, my attorney explained. He wanted to know what steps would be necessary if you began showing signs of dementia or became unable to make sound financial decisions. I was 79 years old and sharper than men half my age. I could still review a 100-page contract and spot every potential problem. I could calculate construction costs in my head faster than most people could do it with a calculator. But my son was already laying the groundwork to have me declared mentally unfit. The most chilling discovery came when I hired a private investigator to conduct surveillance on my own family. It felt like the ultimate betrayal of trust, but I needed to know what they were planning when they thought I wasn't watching. The investigator's report read like a thriller novel. Cornelius and Evangeline had been meeting regularly with financial advisors, discussing strategies for managing inherited wealth and minimizing estate tax obligations. They had consulted with multiple lawyers about guardianship laws and the legal requirements for institutionalizing elderly family members. Most damning of all, they had toured several high-end nursing facilities, specifically asking about their policies for residents with limited family contact and restricted visitation rights. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to lock me away somewhere I could never cause problems for them again. But the final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Maria, our longtime housekeeper who had worked for our family for 15 years, approached me one afternoon with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Whitmore," she said in her heavily accented English, "I need to tell you something, but I'm scared I lose my job." She had overheard a phone conversation between Evangeline and someone she called the lawyer. Evangeline had been discussing the old man problem and asking about accelerated timelines for gaining control of my assets. she said. Maria whispered, looking around nervously. She said that maybe you have accident soon. Make everything easier. An accident. They weren't just planning to steal from me and institutionalize me. They were discussing the possibility of arranging my death. That night, I sat in my study until dawn, staring out at the city I had helped build, thinking about the son I had raised and loved unconditionally for 57 years. The boy who had once promised to build things that would make me proud had grown into a man who was planning to destroy me. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the old man they were plotting against. They saw an aging father who trusted too much and suspected too little. They didn't see the strategic mind that had built a construction empire from nothing. They didn't understand that the same skills that had outmaneuvered competitors and won million-dollar contracts could be used to protect everything I had worked for. If they wanted to play a game of deception and betrayal, I would show them how it's done by a master. But first, I needed to make sure I was holding all the cards when the final hand was played. The real game was just beginning. Knowledge without action is powerless, but action without careful planning is suicide. I had discovered my son's treacherous intentions, but simply confronting him would only force him to accelerate his timeline or find more subtle methods. Instead, I decided to use their own strategy against them. I would let them think they were winning while I prepared for their complete destruction. My first move was financial. Over the next 3 weeks, I quietly liquidated $47 million in assets, transferring the money to offshore accounts that Cornelius knew nothing about. I sold stock portfolios cashed in bonds and converted real estate investments into untraceable funds. To anyone watching my regular accounts, it would appear that I was simply reorganizing my holdings for tax purposes. But the real masterstroke was changing my will. I met with a different attorney in Houston, someone completely outside Dallas legal circles, who had no connection to my family or business. The new document left my entire estate to the Whitmore Foundation for Elderly Protection, a charitable organization I established specifically to help seniors who had been abused or exploited by their own families. Cornelius would inherit exactly $1 and a letter explaining why. "Mr. Whitmore," the Houston attorney said, "as I signed the final documents, are you absolutely certain about this decision? This completely disinherits your son from what I understand is a substantial fortune." "My son died the day he started planning to kill me," I replied. "I'm simply making it official. The second phase of my plan involves surveillance. If they were going to destroy me, I wanted every moment of their betrayal documented in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. I hired a team of security specialists who installed microscopic cameras throughout the mansion devices, so small they were virtually invisible but powerful enough to record everything. The cameras went everywhere: the living room where family conversations took place, the kitchen where they thought they could speak freely, the study where they might search through my personal papers, and most importantly, the basement level, where I suspected they would eventually try to imprison me. I also had recording devices installed in my office at Whitmore Construction and in both of their cars. Every phone call, every private conversation, every moment when they revealed their true intentions would be captured and preserved as evidence. The third element was legal protection. I established relationships with federal investigators who specialized in elder abuse and financial crimes. I provided them with preliminary evidence of the conspiracy and arranged for regular check-ins. If I suddenly disappeared or was declared incompetent, they would immediately launch a full investigation. I also created a dead man's switch, a series of automated emails that would be sent to law enforcement media outlets and business associates if I failed to reset the system every 72 hours. The emails contained detailed evidence of the plot against me and instructions for accessing all the surveillance footage. But perhaps the most important part of my preparation was psychological. I began acting slightly more confused and forgetful than I actually was, giving them false confidence that their plan was working. I would occasionally repeat stories I had already told, ask questions I already knew the answers to, and pretend to struggle with technology that I understood perfectly well. "Dad, you asked me that same question yesterday," Cornelius would say, with barely concealed impatience, exchanging meaningful glances with Evangeline. "Did I?" I would respond, looking genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, son. Sometimes I feel like my mind isn't as sharp as it used to be." These performances convinced them that I was deteriorating faster than expected, which made them bolder and more careless in their planning. They stopped trying to hide their whispered conversations and began discussing their schemes more openly, not realizing that every word was being recorded. The final piece of my strategy was timing. I knew they were waiting for the right moment to implement their plan, some event that would give them legal justification for taking control of my life and assets. I couldn't control when that moment would come, but I could make sure I was ready for it. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning in December, fate handed them the opportunity they had been waiting for. I was reviewing construction blueprints in my office when I felt a strange tingling sensation in my left arm, followed by dizziness and difficulty speaking clearly. It was a mild stroke, what doctors would later describe as a warning event that caused temporary symptoms but no permanent damage. But to Cornelius and Evangeline, it must have looked like a gift from heaven. Within hours of my hospitalization, they were already putting their plan into motion. As I lay in the hospital bed, pretending to be more confused and helpless than I actually was, I could see the excitement in their eyes. They thought the game was over, and they had won. What they didn't realize was that my stroke had simply moved us to the final phase of a much larger game that I had been orchestrating for months. Every conversation they had in my hospital room was being recorded by a device hidden in my personal belongings. Every decision they made about my care was being documented and transmitted to federal investigators. When they suggested that I would need special assistance during my recovery, I nodded weakly and agreed that they knew what was best for me. When they described the beautiful apartment they had prepared in the basement level of our mansion, I thanked them for their thoughtfulness and consideration. But inside I was smiling. Because I knew something they didn't, the basement they had converted into my prison was equipped with more surveillance equipment than a government safe house. Every moment of my captivity would be recorded in perfect detail, creating an unbreakable legal case for kidnapping, elder abuse, and attempted murder. As they wheeled me out of the hospital 3 days later, talking in soothing voices about my recovery and their plans to take care of me, I felt completely calm. The trap had been set for months. The evidence was being collected automatically. The authorities were standing by. All that remained was to let them spring their trap, so I could spring mine. The final act was about to begin, and they had no idea they were walking into their own destruction. The ride home from the hospital felt like a funeral procession, except I was the only one who knew whose funeral it would actually be. Cornelius drove slowly and carefully, occasionally glancing at me in the rearview mirror with what appeared to be genuine concern. Evangeline sat beside him in the front seat, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming silently against her designer purse. "How are you feeling, Dad?" Cornelius asked as we pulled into the circular driveway of our family mansion. Any dizziness or confusion, I let my head loll slightly to one side and spoke with a deliberate slur that I had been practicing for weeks. "A little tired, son. Everything seems fuzzy." "That's completely normal after what you've been through," Evangeline said, turning to face me with a smile that would have fooled anyone who didn't know what I knew. "The doctors said it might take some time for your mind to clear up completely." They helped me out of the car with exaggerated care, each taking one of my arms as if I were made of fragile glass. To any neighbor watching, we must have looked like a loving family caring for their elderly patriarch. The performance was flawless, but I could feel the tension in their grip, the barely contained excitement as they guided me toward the front door. This wasn't the gentle assistance of concerned relatives. This was the careful handling of valuable cargo being delivered to its final destination. "Now, Dad," Cornelius said as we entered the foyer, "Evangeline and I have been working very hard while you were in the hospital to prepare a special place for your recovery. We want to make sure you have everything you need to get better." "That's so thoughtful of you both," I replied, allowing my voice to shake with what they would interpret as age and weakness. "I don't know what I would do without you." Evangeline's smile grew wider. "Family takes care of family, Thaddeus. That's what we're here for." They led me through the main hallway toward the basement stairs, and I could feel my heart rate increasing despite my outward calm. This was it, the moment I had been preparing for the final confirmation of their betrayal. Every step we took was being recorded by hidden cameras, every word preserved for the legal proceedings that would follow. "We've converted the entire basement level into a beautiful apartment just for you," Cornelius explained, as we descended the stairs. "It has everything you could want, a comfortable bedroom, a sitting area with a big screen television, even a small kitchen area." What he didn't mention was that it also had reinforced locks on the doors and bars on the small windows that faced the backyard. What he didn't say was that the apartment had been designed as a prison cell disguised as a luxury suite. The basement had indeed been renovated, but not with my comfort in mind. The walls had been soundproofed so that no one could hear calls for help. The windows had been sealed and covered with decorative screens that looked attractive but were actually security barriers. The phone jacks had been removed and there were no internet connections. "This is lovely," I said, looking around at my future prison with feigned appreciation. "You've thought of everything." "We certainly have," Evangeline said, and for just a moment her mask slipped enough for me to see the cold satisfaction in her eyes. "You'll be very comfortable here, Thaddeus. Very secure." Cornelius showed me around the space, pointing out amenities that were actually control mechanisms. The refrigerator was stocked with just enough food for a few days. The bathroom had no lock on the door. The bedroom had a hospital-style bed with railings that could be used for restraint. "Now, Dad, here's the important part," Cornelius said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "The doctors were very clear that you need complete rest and minimal stimulation while you recover. That means no visitors, no phone calls, no unnecessary excitement. We've arranged for a private nurse to check on you periodically," Evangeline added, "but mostly you'll need to rest quietly and let your brain heal from the trauma." I nodded, obediently playing the role of the confused old man who trusted his family completely. "Whatever you think is best. I just want to get better." "Of course you do," Cornelius said, patting my shoulder with what might have been genuine affection if I didn't know better. "And you will get better, Dad. You just need to be patient and let us handle everything else." That's when Evangeline delivered the line that revealed the true nature of their plan. "The most important thing, Thaddeus, is that you understand you can't leave this area without our permission. The stairs are going to be locked for your own safety. We can't risk you falling and hurting yourself while you're still recovering. Locked stairs." They were telling me directly that I was now their prisoner, but disguising it as medical necessity and family concern. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll stay right here until you say it's safe." "Good," Cornelius said, and I could hear relief in his voice. "We're going to leave you to rest now. There's food in the refrigerator, books on the shelf, and the television has all your favorite channels." They moved toward the stairs, and I could sense their eagerness to leave to begin the next phase of whatever they had planned. But before they reached the door, Cornelius turned back to face me one final time. "Dad, I want you to know that everything we're doing is because we love you and want what's best for you. Sometimes family has to make difficult decisions to protect the people they care about." The hypocrisy of those words was breathtaking. He was talking about love while imprisoning me, about protection while planning my destruction, about family while committing the ultimate betrayal. "I know, son," I replied. "I trust you completely." And then Evangeline said the words that would be played in courtrooms and featured in news reports across the country. "You're going to rot here, old man, and there's nothing you can do about it. We're leaving for Europe tomorrow morning, and when we come back in 3 months, you'll either be dead from neglect or so broken that no one will ever believe a word you say." The mask had finally come off completely. There was no more pretense of love or care or family obligation, just raw greed and calculated cruelty. Cornelius looked shocked by his wife's bluntness, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he just nodded grimly and followed her up the stairs. The last thing I heard before the door slammed shut was the sound of multiple locks clicking into place, followed by Evangeline's laughter echoing through the basement as they walked away. I sat in the chair they had provided and looked around at my prison cell, listening to their footsteps disappearing above me. Then I smiled for the first time in months, because every word of that conversation had been recorded in perfect high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. Every threat, every admission of guilt, every moment of their betrayal was now preserved forever as evidence that would destroy them both. Phase 1 of their plan was complete, but Phase 1 of my plan was just beginning. They thought they had won the game, but they didn't realize they had just handed me everything I needed to checkmate them both. The first week of my imprisonment was the hardest, not because of physical discomfort, but because of the psychological weight of knowing that my own son had left me to die. Every morning when I woke up in that basement prison, I had to remind myself that this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about justice. They had stocked the refrigerator with exactly enough food for 5 days, clearly expecting me to weaken quickly and become completely helpless. But they had underestimated the man they were dealing with. I had survived the Great Depression as a child, built a construction empire from nothing, and weathered every storm that life had thrown at me for 82 years. A spoiled son and his greedy wife weren't going to break me now. I rationed the food carefully, making it last 2 weeks instead of 5 days. I collected rainwater that leaked through a small crack in the basement wall. I did exercises to maintain my strength, using furniture as weights and walking laps around the small space to keep my circulation strong. But more importantly, I used those 3 months to create an unbreakable legal case against them. Every day, I spoke directly to the hidden cameras I had installed, providing detailed commentary about my condition, my treatment, and the evidence of their crimes. I documented every aspect of my imprisonment: the locked doors, the sealed windows, the deliberate starvation, the complete isolation from medical care. Day 15, I would say to the camera hidden in the bookshelf. No contact from Cornelius or Evangeline. The food ran out 3 days ago. They clearly intended for me to starve to death in this basement while they enjoyed their European vacation. I also used the time to prepare additional evidence. Hidden in the basement walls, I had concealed copies of all the financial documents that proved I had been mentally competent when I changed my will. I wrote detailed letters explaining the entire conspiracy, sealed them in waterproof containers, and hid them where investigators would eventually find them. Most importantly, I maintained detailed written records of everything that had happened, creating a timeline that would be impossible to dispute in court. Every conversation, every threat, every moment of abuse was documented with dates, times, and precise quotes. The isolation was brutal, but I wasn't truly alone. Every 72 hours, I managed to access a hidden communication device I had installed before my imprisonment and reset the dead man's switch that would alert authorities if something happened to me. The federal investigators I had contacted were monitoring the situation, waiting for my signal to move forward. By the end of the first month, I had lost 20 pounds and looked genuinely frail, which would only strengthen the case against Cornelius and Evangeline. The cameras captured every day of my deterioration, creating visual evidence of elder abuse that would be impossible to explain away. During the second month, I received an unexpected visitor. Maria, our longtime housekeeper, had somehow obtained a key to the basement and brought me food and medicine. She had been horrified to discover what Cornelius and Evangeline had done and had been secretly helping me survive. "Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I call police many times, but they say is family matter. They no believe me." "It's okay, Maria," I assured her. "When this is over, the police will believe everything. Just keep bringing food when you can, and don't let anyone know you've seen me." Maria's visits were a lifeline, but they also provided something even more valuable: an independent witness to my imprisonment. She could testify that she had found me locked in the basement, starving and abandoned, while my son and daughter-in-law vacationed in Europe with money they had stolen from my accounts. The third month was the longest. I knew Cornelius and Evangeline would be returning soon, and I had to prepare for the final confrontation. Every day, I rehearsed what I would say and do when they came back. I had to appear weak and broken, while actually being stronger and more prepared than I had ever been in my life. I spent hours each day speaking to the cameras, making sure there was no doubt about my mental competence or my understanding of what had been done to me. "Today marks day 87 of my imprisonment," I said to the hidden recorder. "Cornelius and Evangeline Whitmore locked me in this basement on December 15th and left me here to die while they traveled to Europe. They stole millions of dollars from my accounts, threatened my life, and abandoned me without food, water, or medical care. I am recording this testimony while I am of sound mind and clear memory in case they succeed in killing me before justice can be served." But they wouldn't succeed, because while they had been sipping champagne in Paris and touring museums in Rome, spending money they had stolen from me, I had been building the most comprehensive case of elder abuse and financial fraud that federal prosecutors had ever seen. Every day of my imprisonment had been recorded in high-definition video. Every threat they had made was preserved in crystal-clear audio. Every dollar they had stolen was tracked and documented. Every law they had broken was cataloged and proven. On day 91, I heard car doors slamming in the driveway above me. They were back from their European vacation, probably expecting to find my corpse in the basement, or at best a broken old man who would never be able to tell anyone what they had done. I positioned myself in the chair where they had left me 3 months earlier, made sure the cameras had clear views of the reunion, and waited for them to come downstairs to check on their victim. But I wasn't their victim anymore. I was their judge, jury, and executioner. As I heard their footsteps on the floor above me moving toward the basement door, I smiled for the second time since this nightmare had begun, because they were about to walk into a trap that had been 3 months in the making. They thought they were coming home to claim their prize, but they were actually walking into the most devastating legal ambush in the history of American elder abuse cases. The sound of keys jingling in the basement door locks was like music to my ears. Justice was finally coming down those stairs. The basement door creaked open, and I heard Evangeline's voice drifting down the stairs, casual and unconcerned, as if she were checking on a houseplant rather than a human being she had left to die. "I wonder if the old fool is even still alive," she said with a laugh that made my blood run cold. 3 months is a long time for someone his age to survive down there. He's probably too weak to cause any trouble now, Cornelius replied, his voice carrying the same callous indifference. Even if he survived, who's going to believe the ravings of a senile old man who's been locked in a basement? They descended the stairs slowly, and I could hear the confidence in their footsteps. They thought they were coming to view their victory, to see the broken remains of the man who had once stood in their way. When they reached the bottom of the stairs and saw me sitting in the same chair where they had left me looking frail and defeated, Evangeline actually clapped her hands together in delight. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Look who survived after all. You're tougher than we expected, Thaddeus." Cornelius walked over to me, studying my appearance with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. I had lost significant weight, my clothes hung loose on my frame, and I had deliberately allowed my beard to grow wild and unkempt. To them I must have looked like a broken man who posed no threat to anyone. "Dad," Cornelius said, and the word sounded strange coming from his mouth after everything that had happened. "I hope you understand why we had to do this. You were becoming a danger to yourself and others. This was for your own good. Even now, even after leaving me to starve in a basement for 3 months, he was still trying to justify his actions with lies about caring for my welfare." "I understand, son," I said in a weak, defeated voice that I had been practicing for weeks. "I know you did what you thought was best." Evangeline smiled triumphantly. "Good. Now that you've had time to think about your situation, we need to discuss some practical matters. We've taken the liberty of managing your financial affairs while you've been recovering. You'll be happy to know that everything has been handled very efficiently." Handled was an interesting way to describe grand theft and fraud, but I let her continue. "We've also made arrangements for your long-term care," Cornelius added. "There's a very nice facility about 2 hours outside Dallas where you'll be much more comfortable. They specialize in patients with cognitive issues. A nursing home in the middle of nowhere where I would be isolated from anyone who might listen to my story or believe my accusations. The final step in their plan to erase me from existence, while they enjoyed the fortune they had stolen." But what they didn't know was that while they were speaking, federal agents were already surrounding the house above us. "That sounds wonderful," I said, maintaining my act of defeated acceptance. "I'm ready to go whenever you think is best." Evangeline's smile grew even wider. "Excellent. We'll make the arrangements tomorrow. But first there are some legal documents you need to sign just to make everything official." She pulled out a folder containing papers that would undoubtedly transfer the last remaining assets they hadn't already stolen, and grant them complete legal authority over my life and death. "Of course," I said, reaching for the pen she offered. "I trust you completely." That's when we heard the first sounds from upstairs, heavy footsteps, shouted commands, doors slamming open. "FBI search warrant." Everyone on the ground. The color drained from both their faces as the reality of the situation began to dawn on them. Cornelius looked around wildly, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Evangeline's hand flew to her throat, her carefully composed mask finally cracking. "What's happening?" Cornelius whispered, his voice shaking with panic. I stood up slowly, feeling strength return to my body as I dropped the pretense of frailty that I had maintained for so long. "What's happening, son, is that you're about to learn what real consequences look like." The basement door burst open, and 6 federal agents in tactical gear came down the stairs. With weapons drawn, behind them came Agent Sarah Mitchell, the lead investigator I had been working with for months. "Cornelius Whitmore and Evangeline Whitmore," Agent Mitchell announced, "you are under arrest for elder abuse, kidnapping, fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder." As the agents handcuffed them both, I could see the shock and disbelief in their eyes. They had been so confident in their plan, so certain that they had covered all their bases and eliminated every possible threat. "This is impossible," Evangeline screamed as they secured her hands behind her back. "He's senile. He doesn't know what he's saying. No one will believe him." "Ma'am," Agent Mitchell replied calmly, "we have 3 months of high-definition video footage showing exactly what you did to this man. We have audio recordings of every threat you made, every crime you committed, and every moment of abuse you inflicted. We also have complete financial records showing the $47 million you stole from his accounts." The look of absolute horror that crossed their faces was worth every day of suffering I had endured in that basement. "You see," I said, looking directly at Cornelius as the agents prepared to take him upstairs, "you made one critical mistake. You assumed I was just a helpless old man who would roll over and let you destroy me. But I didn't build a construction empire by being helpless. I built it by being smarter, tougher, and more strategic than my competitors." "You planned this," Cornelius said, his voice barely a whisper. You knew what we were going to do. I knew exactly what you were going to do because I raised you and I knew what you had become. The only question was whether you would actually go through with it or find some shred of decency buried somewhere in your soul. As they led him up the stairs, Cornelius turned back one final time. Dad, please, I'm still your son. No, I replied, and my voice carried the weight of absolute finality. My son died the day he decided to murder his father for money. You're just a stranger who happens to share my DNA. The trial lasted 6 weeks and made national headlines. The video evidence was so overwhelming that Cornelius's attorneys advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He received 25 years in federal prison for elder abuse, kidnapping, and fraud. Evangeline, however, decided to fight the charges, claiming she had been manipulated by her husband and knew nothing about the financial crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. She received 30 years without the possibility of parole. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge read her final statement before sentencing. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, "You told the victim that he would rot in that basement. Instead, you will rot in federal prison while he lives freely as a hero to elder abuse victims across the country." Evangeline was led away in shackles, screaming threats and accusations that no one believed or cared about. As for the money they had stolen, every penny was recovered and returned to my accounts. The Whitmore Foundation for Elderly Protection, which inherited my estate according to my revised will, became one of the most well-funded advocacy organizations in the country. But my story doesn't end with their punishment. It ends with something much more important, the knowledge that justice, though sometimes delayed, is never truly denied to those who are willing to fight for it. Today, at 85 years old, I wake up every morning in a modest apartment overlooking downtown Dallas, and I can honestly say I've never been happier or more at peace with my life. The mansion on Turtle Creek Boulevard was sold months ago, and I donated the proceeds to expand the Whitmore Foundation's reach across the country. I don't miss the big house, or the expensive furniture, or the symbols of wealth that once seemed so important. What I've discovered in these past 3 years is that true richness comes not from what you own, but from what you give and the lives you touch along the way. The Whitmore Foundation for Elderly Protection has grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We've helped over 2,000 seniors who were being abused, exploited, or abandoned by their own families. We provide legal assistance, safe housing, financial counseling, and most importantly, we give them back their dignity and their voice. Every week, I receive letters from elderly people across America who tell me that my story gave them the courage to speak up about their own situations. Grandmothers who were being financially exploited by their children, grandfathers who were being isolated and neglected in nursing homes, senior citizens who thought they had no choice but to endure abuse because they didn't want to cause trouble for their families. My favorite part of this new chapter in my life is the speaking engagements. I travel to senior centers, community groups, and legal conferences, sharing my story and teaching others about the warning signs of elder abuse. I show them the video evidence that brought down Cornelius and Evangeline not for revenge, but for education. The most dangerous predators, I tell these audiences, are often the ones who call you family. They count on your love, your trust, and your reluctance to believe that someone you raised or someone you married could actually want to harm you. But I also share the most important lesson I learned from this experience. You are never too old, too frail, or too powerless to fight back against those who would exploit you. Last month, I received a letter that moved me to tears. It was from a 78-year-old woman in Oregon whose daughter had been systematically stealing her Social Security checks and threatening to put her in a nursing home if she complained. "Mr. Whitmore," she wrote, "your story taught me that I didn't have to be a victim. I contacted the authorities, gathered evidence, just like you did, and my daughter is now facing criminal charges. I'm living independently again, and for the first time in years, I'm not afraid. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." That letter represents everything this foundation stands for: empowerment, justice, and the fundamental belief that every person deserves to live their final years with dignity and respect. I've also reconnected with old friends and made new ones who value me for who I am not, what I can give them. Every Sunday, I have dinner with Maria, my former housekeeper, who risked her job to help keep me alive during those dark months in the basement. She's become like family to me, the kind of family that's built on loyalty and genuine care rather than greed and manipulation. Sometimes people ask me if I regret having children, if the betrayal by Cornelius has made me bitter about parenthood and family relationships. The answer is no. I regret trusting blindly instead of loving wisely. I regret enabling bad behavior instead of setting healthy boundaries. But I don't regret the love I gave, even if it wasn't appreciated or returned. What I've learned is that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling. It's weakness disguised as virtue. True love sometimes means saying no, setting limits, and demanding the respect that every human being deserves. If there's one message I want people to take from my story, it's this: you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. For too many years, I accepted disrespect, manipulation, and exploitation because I confused unconditional love with unconditional tolerance. There's a difference between loving someone unconditionally and allowing them to treat you badly without consequences. Love doesn't mean being a doormat. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity or your safety for someone else's comfort. The foundation has also given me a sense of purpose that I never had even during my most successful years in business. Building skyscrapers was satisfying, but building hope in the lives of vulnerable seniors is transformative. We're currently working on legislation that would make elder abuse a federal crime with mandatory minimum sentences. We're training law enforcement officers to recognize the signs of financial exploitation and emotional abuse. We're creating support networks so that seniors never have to face these challenges alone. Every day brings new opportunities to turn my painful experience into positive change for others. Every dollar that Cornelius and Evangeline tried to steal is now being used to protect people just like me from predators just like them. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to remember that justice isn't always swift, but it's always possible for those who are willing to fight for it. Dignity isn't something that can be taken from you by others. It can only be surrendered by yourself. If my story resonates with you, if you know someone who might be facing elder abuse, or if you simply believe that every person deserves to live their final years with respect and dignity, I encourage you to get involved. Share this story. Support organizations that protect vulnerable seniors. Most importantly, speak up when you see injustice, regardless of your age or circumstances. The Whitmore Foundation continues to grow and help more people every year, but we can't do it alone. We need advocates, volunteers, and supporters who believe that no one should have to endure what I went through. Remember to subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, and let me know in the comments what lessons you're taking away from my experience. Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people who need to hear them. Together, we can make sure that no senior citizen ever has to face betrayal and abuse in silence. Together we can build a world where growing old doesn't make you vulnerable to those who should love and protect you. That's my legacy now. Not the buildings I constructed or the money I accumulated, but the lives I've helped save and the dignity I've helped restore. And that, my friends, is worth more than any fortune ever could be. Thaddeus Whitmore's story teaches us that wisdom isn't just about age. It's about recognizing when love becomes enabling and when trust becomes naivety. The most profound lesson here isn't about family betrayal, but about the power of setting boundaries and demanding the respect we deserve regardless of our age or circumstances. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.